This is the story of how hope can bloom in the barrenest of places. It's the story of a choice made in the shadow of death. It's the story of 3 starving horses and the unimaginable act that saved them. Their owner, a man named Jensen Thorne, had faced a series of devastating setbacks. Drought had scorched his land. A sickness had swept through his herd. He was a man pushed to the absolute brink, his spirit as battered as his finances. Jensen had always loved his horses. They were more than just livestock. They were his partners, his companions. He'd raised them from colts, gentled them with his own hands, and raced them under the vast sky. There was Blaze, a fiery chestnut with a spirit as untamed as his name. Then there was Shadow, a sleek black mare, intelligent and fiercely loyal. And finally, there was Spirit, a dappled grey, whose gentle nature had earned him his name. But the good times had evaporated like dew under the relentless sun. The ranch was failing. He couldn't afford to feed them. He couldn't afford to care for them. He was faced with an impossible decision, a decision that haunted his waking hours and plagued his dreams. He couldn't bear to watch them suffer any longer, and he couldn't provide for them. One brutal autumn morning, Jensen made the choice that would define him and them. He loaded Blaze, Shadow, and Spirit into his aging trailer. His hands trembled as he secured the latch. He drove them out, far from the familiar barns and pastures. He drove them to the edge of his property, a place where the wild lands began, a place where, he hoped, they might somehow find a way to survive on their own. He couldn't bring himself to say goodbye. He simply opened the trailer gate and watched them step out, blinking in the harsh light. He left them with a prayer and a heavy heart, the metallic clang of the trailer door echoing in the silence. He turned his truck around, the image of their confused, hopeful faces seared into his memory. He told himself it was the only humane thing to do, to let them try, to give them a chance, however slim. But as days turned into weeks, Jensen couldn't shake the gnawing dread. He knew the harsh reality of the wilderness. He knew the scarcity of water, the scarcity of food. He knew the dangers that lurked in the shadows, coyotes, harsh winters, and the sheer, brutal indifference of nature. He tried to push it from his mind, focusing on the arduous task of trying to save his ranch. He sold off what little he could, worked endless hours, and fought a losing battle against poverty. But every time a gust of wind blew, he imagined it carrying the faint whinny of his horses. Every time he saw a dust cloud on the horizon, he wondered if it was them, searching for him, or perhaps for sustenance. He hadn't seen them since he left them. He didn't know if they had managed to find food. He didn't know if they were still together. He didn't know if they were even alive. The silence was deafening. The not knowing was a torment. He had to know. He had to see for himself. So, one crisp morning, days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The memory of Jensen leaving the horses was a raw wound. He had driven them far out to a remote corner of his land, a place where the wild grasses met the rugged, unforgiving terrain. He'd opened the trailer door and watched them step out, hesitant but alive. He'd driven away, his heart a lead weight in his chest, leaving them to an uncertain fate. He told himself it was the only humane option left. He couldn't afford to feed them. He couldn't watch them waste away in a pasture he could no longer maintain. So he gave them a chance. A brutal, wild chance. Now, months later, the drought had worsened. The ranch was a ghost of its former self. Jensen was on the brink of losing everything. He hadn't seen the horses since that day. The silence from them was a constant, aching reminder. Was it better not to know? Or did he owe it to them and to himself to find out what had become of Blaze, Shadow, and Spirit? His gut told him to go. His heart ached with a desperate need for answers. He loaded up his old truck, a few sacks of feed he could barely spare, and a canteen of water. He drove for hours, leaving the familiar dust of his ranch behind. He was heading towards the remote section where he had left them. The landscape grew more rugged, more desolate. The wind whispered secrets through the dry, brittle grass. Every shadow seemed to hold a question. He parked the truck where the rough track ended. He got out, the silence hitting him like a physical blow. He scanned the horizon, nothing but endless dry expanse. He began to walk, his boots crunching on the parched earth. He called out their names, his voice raspy and small against the vastness. Blaze! Shadow! Spirit! Only the wind answered, rustling the dead leaves. He walked for what felt like hours, his hope dwindling with every step. He saw no sign of them, no tracks, no distant shapes, just the stark, unchanging landscape. Then, in the far distance, he saw it, a faint movement. He squinted, his heart leaping into his throat. It was too far to make out clearly, but it was something. He started to walk faster, then broke into a jog, his exhaustion forgotten. As he got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a horse. And then another, and another. They were thin, so thin. Their ribs were clearly visible, their backs were hollowed out, their coats were dull and dirty, but they were alive. All three of them, Blaze, Shadow, and Spirit. They stood close together, a small island of life in a sea of desolation. Jensen's eyes welled up. He'd never been so relieved, so heartbroken in his entire life. He approached them slowly, talking to them in a low, soothing voice. Hey boys, hey girls, it's me, it's Jensen. They watched him, their heads held low, their eyes showing a flicker of recognition, but also a deep, weary resignation. They were too weak to run, too weak to even approach him with enthusiasm. He reached them and gently stroked Blaze's neck. The muscle beneath his hand was dry and brittle. Shadow nudged his shoulder with her nose, a faint gesture of acknowledgement. Spirit stood a little apart, watching him with those soulful, empty eyes. Jensen opened a sack of feed, the sound of it rustling a harsh intrusion into the silence. He poured it onto the ground, a meager offering. The horses looked at the feed, then back at Jensen as if unsure. They were so weak they could barely stand. They took tentative bites, their jaws working slowly, painfully. It was clear this wasn't enough. It wouldn't be enough. They needed more. They needed water. They needed proper care. They were still in dire straits. Jensen knew he couldn't leave them here. Not now. Not when he'd found them. He had to do something. He had to get them back. But how? They were barely able to walk. His truck was miles away. The trailer was back at the ranch. It felt like an insurmountable task. He sat down in the dust next to Blaze, the immensity of the situation pressing down on him. He looked at the three horses, their silent suffering a heavy weight. He had thought leaving them was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Finding them like this, broken and starving, was infinitely worse. He sat there for a long time, just watching them. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows. The air grew colder. He knew he couldn't stay the night. He had to get help. But who could he call? He was so far out. He stood up, a grim determination settling in his heart. He had to try. He had to get them back to the ranch, no matter the cost. He started walking back towards his truck, glancing back at the horses. They watched him go, their heads drooping, their future still hanging precariously in the balance. He felt their eyes on his back, a silent plea. He reached his truck, his body aching. He started the engine, the roar, a jarring sound. He drove back to the ranch, his mind racing. He needed a plan, a good plan. And he needed it fast. He arrived back at his dilapidated barn. The emptiness inside seemed to mock him. He rummaged through old tack, looking for anything useful. He found some old blankets, a few halters. He thought about the feed. It was a start, but they needed much more. He needed water, and he needed a way to transport them. His gaze fell upon the old, sturdy horse trailer, parked in the corner, dusty and unused. It was functional at least. But getting them into it would be the challenge. They were so weak. He called his only neighbor, a gruff but kind man named Silas, who lived a few miles down the road. He explained the situation, his voice thick with emotion. Silas listened patiently. "Jensen," he said, his voice gruff but laced with concern. "I'll be right over. Bring what you can." Silas arrived with his own truck and a more substantial supply of hay and oats. Together they drove back out to where Jensen had found the horses. The sun was almost gone. The horses were still there, huddled together, their forms barely visible in the fading light. Getting them into the trailer was a monumental effort. Silas, with his strength and experience, helped Jensen. They coaxed, they gently pushed, they spoke words of encouragement. Blaze, the strongest, was the first to reluctantly step in, stumbling as he did. Shadow followed, weary but compliant. Spirit was the most difficult. He seemed resigned to his fate, his spirit almost extinguished. Jensen had to practically lift him, his own strength failing him. Finally, all three were inside. The drive back was slow and careful. The horses shifted and stumbled, but they were in the trailer on their way to safety. Jensen felt a sliver of hope, a fragile thing, but hope nonetheless. Back at the ranch, Silas helped Jensen unload them into a small sheltered corral. Jensen had managed to fill a trough with water. He laid out the hay and oats. He watched them drink, their thirst immense. He watched them eat, their hunger voracious, but their bodies too weak to fully utilize the nourishment. That night, Jensen didn't sleep. He lay on a cot in the barn, listening to the soft sounds of the horses in the corral, the occasional rustle of hay, a soft sigh, the sound of them drinking. He felt a profound sense of responsibility. He had brought them back from the brink, but their journey was far from over. They needed time. They needed nourishment. They needed his care. The next few days were a blur of feeding, watering, and gentle grooming. Jensen brushed away the dirt, revealing the faint outlines of their former glory. He spoke to them constantly, his voice a low murmur of comfort and reassurance. He nursed them back to health, a slow, painstaking process. There were moments of doubt, days when their progress seemed to stall, days when Jensen wondered if they would ever truly recover. But then there would be a small sign, a brighter glint in an eye, a stronger step, a more eager nuzzle, and Jensen's hope would rekindle. He started with small amounts of soft feed, gradually increasing the quantity and variety. He kept them in the small corral, where they couldn't exert themselves too much, but where they had shelter and easy access to food and water. He watched them closely, monitoring their breathing, their energy levels, their general demeanor. He saw how Blaze, despite his weakness, still had a spark of his old fire, occasionally nudging his companions playfully. He saw how Shadow, ever the sensible one, seemed to instinctively know how to conserve her energy, only moving when necessary. And he saw Spirit, the gentlest of them all, slowly begin to trust again, allowing Jensen to pet him for longer periods, his large brown eyes losing some of their vacant despair. The transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible, day by day. But over weeks, it became undeniable. Their coats started to regain their sheen. Their ribs became less prominent. Their eyes began to hold more life. They started to stand taller, their movements becoming less hesitant, more fluid. Jensen would sit with them for hours, talking about his day, about his hopes for the ranch, about the future. He wasn't sure if they understood the words, but he felt they understood the sentiment, the love, the unwavering commitment he felt for them. He had made a mistake leaving them, a terrible mistake born of desperation, but he was determined to make it right. One afternoon, Silas came by to check on them. He whistled softly as he looked into the corral. "Well, I'll be," he said, a broad grin spreading across his face. "You've worked a miracle, Jensen. They look like different horses." Jensen smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It's a start, Silas. Just a start." As the horses grew stronger, Jensen cautiously let them out into a larger pasture. They explored with a newfound energy, their hooves thudding against the earth with a sound he hadn't heard in so long. They ran, not with the wild abandon of their youth, but with a joyful, grateful pace. They rolled in the dust, they nuzzled each other. Their bond, forged in hardship, now strengthened by their shared survival. Jensen watched them, his heart full. He knew the ranch was still struggling. He knew he still had a long, hard road ahead. But seeing Blaze, Shadow and Spirit alive and thriving, gave him the strength to keep going. They were a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hope, and a reminder of the deep connection between humans and animals. He had almost lost them. He had made a terrible decision, But in the end, against all odds, he had found them, rescued them, and nursed them back to health. And in doing so, he had also rescued a part of himself. He had rediscovered his own capacity for love and perseverance. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jensen stood by the fence watching his horses graze peacefully. Blaze trotted over, nudging his hand with his nose. Shadow stood beside him, a quiet presence. Spirit came last, his large, gentle eyes looking directly into Jensen's. There was no longer despair in them, but a deep, quiet gratitude. Jensen stroked Spirit's warm neck. He knew he would never forget the day he found them, so close to death. He knew he would never forget the fear, the despair, the immense relief. He had brought them back from the edge. He had given them a second chance. And in return, they had given him something even more valuable, the renewed belief in the possibility of redemption and the enduring power of hope, even in the darkest of times. He looked out at the vast wild land that had nearly claimed them. It was a harsh environment, unforgiving. But his horses had faced it, and they had survived. They had found a way. And he, Jensen Thorne, would too. He had learned a profound lesson in those difficult months. He had learned that sometimes the most devastating situations can lead to the most extraordinary acts of courage and compassion. He had learned that life, even when hanging by a thread, is precious. And he had learned that the bonds we share, whether with animals or with each other, are the most powerful forces we possess. The story of Blaze, Shadow, and Spirit wasn't just about survival. It was about the unwavering spirit that refuses to be extinguished. It was about finding strength when you thought you had none left. It was about the quiet heroism found in simple acts of kindness and dedication. Jensen knew the ranch still had a long way to go. The land was dry, the challenges were many, but he no longer felt alone. He had his horses, they had each other, and in their shared resilience, they had a beacon of hope for the future. They were a living testament to the fact that even when all seems lost, the smallest spark of life, nurtured with love and perseverance, can ignite into a flame that guides you through the darkest night. He watched them trot off towards the setting sun, their powerful bodies silhouetted against the vibrant sky. They moved with a grace and strength he hadn't seen in months. They were not just survivors, they were thrivers. They were a symbol of Jensen's own will to persevere. Their recovery mirrored his own slow, arduous journey back from the brink of despair. He thought about the unimaginable act, the desperate decision to leave them, and the unwavering resolve to bring them back. It was a story of near tragedy, but ultimately a story of triumph. A triumph of love over despair, of life over death, of hope over hopelessness. And as Jensen Thorne stood there, the wind in his hair, the vastness of his land stretching before him, he knew one thing for certain: he would never give up on them. And they, in their own silent, powerful way, would never give up on him. Their shared journey was far from over, but now they faced it together, stronger, wiser, and more grateful than ever before. The horses, once left to the mercy of the unforgiving elements, now stood as a testament to Jensen's unwavering dedication. Their journey back from the brink was slow, marked by agonizing steps and fragile recoveries. Jensen poured every ounce of his dwindling energy into their care, his own survival intertwined with theirs. He watched them trot off towards the setting sun, their powerful bodies silhouetted against the vibrant sky. They moved with a grace and strength he hadn't seen in months. They were not just survivors, they were thrivers. They were a symbol of Jensen's own will to persevere. Their recovery mirrored his own slow, arduous journey back from the brink of despair. He thought about the unimaginable act, the desperate decision to leave them, and the unwavering resolve to bring them back. It was a story of near tragedy, but ultimately a story of triumph, a triumph of love, over despair, of life over death, of hope over hopelessness. And as Jensen Thorne stood there, the wind in his hair, the vastness of his land stretching before him, he knew one thing for certain: he would never give up on them, and they, in their own silent, powerful way, would never give up on him. Their shared journey was far from over, but now they faced it together, stronger, wiser, and more grateful than ever before. He had learned a profound lesson in those difficult months. He had learned that sometimes the most devastating situations can lead to the most extraordinary acts of courage and compassion. He had learned that life, even when hanging by a thread, is precious. And he had learned that the bonds we share, whether with animals or with each other, are the most powerful forces we possess. The story of Blaze, Shadow, and Spirit wasn't just about survival. It was about the unwavering spirit that refuses to be extinguished. It was about finding strength when you thought you had none left. It was about the quiet heroism found in simple acts of kindness and dedication. Jensen knew the ranch still had a long way to go. The land was dry, the challenges were many. But he no longer felt alone. He had his horses. They had each other. And in their shared resilience, they had a beacon of hope for the future. They were a living testament to the fact that even when all seems lost, the smallest spark of life, nurtured with love and perseverance, can ignite into a flame that guides you through the darkest night. He watched them trot off towards the setting sun, their powerful bodies silhouetted against the vibrant sky. They moved with a grace and strength he hadn't seen in months. They were not just survivors, they were thrivers. They were a symbol of Jensen's own will to persevere. Their recovery mirrored his own slow, arduous journey back from the brink of despair. He thought about the unimaginable act, the desperate decision to leave them, and the unwavering resolve to bring them back. It was a story of near tragedy, but ultimately a story of triumph. A triumph of love over despair, of life over death, of hope over hopelessness. And as Jensen Thorne stood there, the wind in his hair, the vastness of his land stretching before him, he knew one thing for certain: he would never give up on them. And they, in their own silent, powerful way, would never give up on him. Their shared journey was far from over, but now they faced it together, stronger, wiser, and more grateful than ever before. He had learned a profound lesson in those difficult months. He had learned that sometimes the most devastating situations can lead to the most extraordinary acts of courage and compassion. He had learned that life, even when hanging by a thread, is precious. And he had learned that the bonds we share, whether with animals or with each other, are the most powerful forces we possess. The story of Blaze, Shadow, and Spirit wasn't just about survival. It was about the unwavering spirit that refuses to be extinguished. It was about finding strength when you thought you had none left. It was about the quiet heroism found in simple acts of kindness and dedication. Jensen knew the ranch still had a long way to go. The land was dry, the challenges were many, but he no longer felt alone. He had his horses, they had each other, and in their shared resilience, they had a beacon of hope for the future. They were a living testament to the fact that even when all seems lost, the smallest spark of life, nurtured with love and perseverance, can ignite into a flame that guides you through the darkest night. If this story of resilience and the unbreakable bond between a man and his horses touched your heart, please consider hitting that like button. It tells us you're enjoying this kind of content and helps us share these incredible stories with more people. And if you want to be the first to see more tales of courage, survival, and the amazing things animals can do, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredible story. What part moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement means the world to us and helps us keep these inspiring stories alive. Thank you for watching.